I've done more than my share of urban exploring, from buildings to wooded areas to old homes and mansions. There's no shortage of it on Long Island. And never really ran into anything that was like... This was when I was a kid, maybe 12 or 13, back when me and my 4 cousins were little hellions. They lived out on a ranch, and we would ride 4-wheelers to a bunch of abandoned buildings in the country all the time. One time we came across a bridge and decided to stop and enjoy the view. It was a beautiful day, I should mention. Sun was shining, birds were singing, and the water in the river looked amazing, rushing under the bridge. Then we noticed something strange. There's a metal wire tied to the rail of the bridge hanging down into the water. Of course, curiosity got the best of us, so we decided to pull it up and see what it was all about. We pull up a deer skull, a huge one too, with large antlers and everything. Mind you, this is not within the timeline of hunting season at all. Then my cousin says, "Look over there." We see what looks like an axe stuck in the middle of a tree stump down by the river. We walk to the end of the bridge and hike our way down to the river, and lo and behold, this is not an axe. It was a deer's leg that had been chopped off and stuck in the dead center of a tree stump, pointing straight up at the sky. We rushed back to the top of the bridge and decided there was no way a deer died by itself, and put its leg in a tree stump and tied its skull to a metal wire. We come to the realization that someone is hunting out of season. Suddenly, as 2 of my cousins are discussing whether to take the head with them or not, they thought it was super cool, but it smelled absolutely horrible. We see some hillbilly-looking man step out onto the porch of a house up on the hill. They are holding rifles. They see that we've pulled the wire with the deer skull and start running down the hill at us. We never rode 4-wheelers so fast. We booked it out of there. We made it back to the ranch and told our parents about it. There used to be this abandoned asylum in the woods by the park near the house where I grew up. The main building around ground had been torn down, but the basement was still there, and you could enter it through a small window that was just big enough to crawl through. The furniture and some medical stuff was all still down there. I was too afraid to go through the window, but my friend wasn't. He was down there for about 5 minutes before he screamed and jumped out of the window. He said something was chasing him. We could hear it down there scurrying around, but none of us wanted to get close enough to the window to look with the flashlight. A few years later, a woman got attacked near there by a gaze of aggressive raccoons. About 10 years ago, I was exploring an old rundown hotel in my city with some friends at about 3 a.m. The property owners were having serious troubles with squatters, so they had put razor wire everywhere. I was wearing thin jeans, I was 18 and stupid. I tripped on some steps and thought some of the razor wire had just caught on my jeans. We keep going and got inside. Soon as I realize my leg is wet. And I don't just mean wet, it is soaked from the knee down. It's dark as hell, so my buddy shines his flashlight on my leg, and it turns out it's blood. I have to drop my pants in front of everyone to see where it's coming from. Right above my knee is this little cut squirting blood. We all start cursing. One of the girls pukes and has to turn away. Fortunately, my buddy, incidentally the one with the flashlight, takes off his belt and sweatshirt and makes a pressure pack for it and gets me to lay down with my leg above my head for a bit. After a while, we decide we have to hike out of there and quick before security comes back for their rounds. So we tighten the belt and hike out of there. I had to take my pants all the way off because I didn't want to rip them over the sweatshirt. So here I am walking out of this hotel and into the subsequent neighborhood to where our car was parked in my boxer briefs, holding my leg, soaked in blood from the knee down. Ended up going okay. Sewed it up at home with the help from a dude with a flashlight. He was a nifty friend to have around. This was a few years ago, but there was an abandoned cookie factory in my city. We found out if we walked down some train tracks, you could get in through an unlocked side door. So, me and 2 other guys went exploring. We entered the basement and wandered through. It was obvious people had been there before by the shitty Hail Satan graffiti tags all over what was a locker or shower room. Anyway, we come to a ladder going up to the next floor, and I proceeded to go up it and realize when the company left the building, they had sectioned this portion of the building off. The ladder went up and had a curved rung on it, so they had taken a large piece of plywood and cut holes in it to fit in through the rungs and laid it on the floor to block it off. I get to the top, lock my legs on the ladder, and push hard on the plywood, and it comes up. There on the floor, about 6 inches in front of my face, was a glass orb. It was reflecting, there in the darkness. I'm looking at my own face and what I can make out with my light. I just stayed there for a minute, expecting something to come out of the darkness and tear my fucking face off and pull me up the ladder. So I took a breath, lifted the plywood, slid underneath onto the floor, and assumed the fucking Wolverine stance. Like that was going to save me from the deranged murder ghost of the abandoned cookie factory. The 2 guys I was with get up the ladder, and we look around. We found a 6-foot-tall T-Rex and toys and all kinds of stuff. Old children's museum exhibits. By this point, if you live in my city, you most likely know where I was. The cookie factory had a nearby children's museum, and they held old exhibits for the museum in one of the empty wings in the factory, maybe for a tax break or something. I guess since the factory shut down, they blocked that part off and hoped they'd forget about it. Bonus story, we went back with a larger group, which isn't a smart idea, because you make more noise, obviously, and we heard someone shouting at us. With us was a friend of mine who was 6'3", 300 pounds. Another guy had a gun on him, just in case as well. So we're not really worried, but this is also not somewhere that you want to draw attention to yourselves. So we decided we'd better leave as we hear this person banging shit and cursing at us. We get out and keep walking, and we finally see the person in question. Little crackhead in purple Vikings jersey with a squeaky voice, who was probably just trying to ride a high in peace. Me and 2 friends were exploring some woods on the outskirts of my city when we were around 12 to 13 years old. These woods had old barracks in them that were used during World War II, but are completely abandoned, overgrown, and run down now. To actually get to any explorable barracks, you had to go quite deep into the forest and up some very steep hills in which you use the tree roots that grow down them to climb up. This was the first time me and my friends had ventured this deep before, so we all were pretty excited at seeing how far we could go and how big the place actually was. Eventually we came to a cross path, and we chose to go down the right side. We had to squeeze our way through some tight, stinging nettle bushes, but luckily, we all had long clothes on to protect us. We stumbled out into this huge clearing area, where right in front of us was a huge building that had a massive entrance on the side. We were all astounded, as we didn't realize any buildings this big were in the forest, and we hadn't seen any real abandoned places before. Of course, we decided to go in and check it out, and inside it stretched quite deep and was very dark. Being young, we were all pretty nervous to actually set foot any further than where the natural light from the opening spread to. We hung around the entrance for a bit, messing around, echoing our voices and such. Eventually, one of my friends is looking off into the darkness with a very frightened expression on his face. Me and my other friend turned to him to ask him what's the matter, and he says, "Guys, I swear I just saw a face or something in the dark over there." Me and my friend, thinking he's trying to just spook us out, tell him to stop messing with us, and we aren't falling for his tricks. That's when it happened. The loud scream of an adult male fills the entire building, amplified by the echo. With that, me and my friends look at each other absolutely terrified and let out shrieks ourselves. We bolted toward the bushes in which we came and start making a break straight back the way we came without looking back. We must have run for a solid 10 minutes straight without even stopping. Those huge steep hills I spoke about earlier, we literally jumped down and just slid down them, getting covered in dirt. We finally reached the edge of the forest and stopped running. We never did find out who was in there or why, but considering how young I was, it was definitely one of my most terrifying experiences. I've certainly done my share of urban exploring, either through abandoned buildings, factories, hospitals, even just really remote wooded areas. Nothing too scary outside of what were probably some jump scares from deer, which probably was one of the scariest I ever had, silly as it may sound. But when you're not expecting something and you come around a turn and something just jumps out of the woods, you jump. No matter how tough you think you are, you jump. A few months ago, I was cruising around Chattanooga with my sister and a friend. We were on the side of town with this factory some people had told us was a pretty cool old place to check out. So we decided, let's kill some time there. Anyone from the area might be familiar with it. It's the old central Soya Factory in Amnicola, and there are several videos online of people exploring it. Our first mistake was going through the gate. It was the obvious way in, so we merrily traipsed down the road and onto the property. It's the middle of the afternoon, so it's bright and sunny, and the wind is blowing so we can hear loose metal banging around up ahead. We pass the silos and end up in the loading dock kind of area. Pretty much every square inch is covered in graffiti, so we wander around there for a minute. Once we enter the building, there's a pitch black hallway to our right. We stay in the loading area and go up to the second floor. My friend is walking ahead of us, and he stops at the top of the stairs to look around before rushing us back down. Apparently, the entire upstairs was trashed, littered in papers and blankets and empty cans. What spooked him was the room at the far end. The half-open door started to swing wider when he looked at it, and he couldn't see anything farther than that. We got back to the main floor, creeped out and ready to leave when we hear a voice whisper, "Hey." Nothing else. But at that moment, the wind stopped and the whole place went dead still. Demon possession horror movie style. We noped the fuck out of there, and as we were heading back to the gate, we found a message. "I can see you," was painted on the asphalt. And where my friend and sister looked back, they both saw a man walk past one of the windows. Apparently, he turned to stare at us for a moment before gliding out of sight again. And even though I didn't see him, we all still had chills hours later. We've talked about going back with more people and better flashlights, but so far no one is that enthusiastic about it. I was exploring an abandoned mine in the Mojave. I was pretty far in, climbing down ladders and exploring old rooms. I saw old newspapers, break rooms, clothes, and unexplored dynamite in the walls. Something spooked me, and I turned around fast to run. I hit my head on the rock, broke my headlamp, and knocked myself out. I came to, I was wet and cold, and it was pitch black. Like no light at all black. I tried my headlamp, didn't work. Tried my backup, didn't work. Flashlight was also dead. I was seriously beginning to get really scared. I continued searching my backpack and found several odd shapes not usually in it. It was Halloween chem lights that my kids had put into my backpack. I tore the first one open and cracked it. Beautiful green light everywhere. I recognized where I was and made my way out. I surveyed myself. I had a gash in my head about 3 inches long. I was covered in blood and mud. I drove to urgent care down in Victorville. I ended up with 13 staples in my head. I never went back into a mine alone after that. I did go into the Cave of the Winds here in Colorado on a candlelight tour years later. I was fine until they had us blow out the candles. That trapped fear in that mine came right back. It was all I could do not to panic and get out of there. Don't explore old abandoned mines by yourself. Tell people where you are. Have backups of backups of backups, and don't rely on friggin' batteries. I've posted this to a couple other Ask Reddit questions, but anytime this type of question comes up, I always go back to growing up in a small rural New England town as a kid. Would always venture into the woods and find neat old things. My dad noticed that I was really interested in exploring and finding old things near our land, so one day asked if I wanted to go see something that no one else he knew had known about. I jumped at the chance and we drove off the mountains and parked on the side of the road. We get out and walk into the woods for what felt like 45 minutes, and we come across this really small cemetery. There had to be 10 or so stones, and you couldn't really make out anything on them, but a couple of them that read something like 1802, 1803, and 1803, 1805. My dad said he stumbled on it as a kid, and it must have been a small family cemetery. It just kind of broke my heart, thinking about how many of those stones were probably infants, toddlers. I came across a very old, very smashed up Volkswagen Bug in a ravine in the woods. It had been there a long time, since it was half buried in the mud. I started poking around the site and found dozens of old school style ladies' stockings, many tied together and disintegrating, scattered around. I found an old Kodak film developing canister. I found a bag of cement, completely hardened, among other things. Plus, a year before, I'd found a very old ice pick close to the site. I got the chills and became a bit concerned. I had posted about this on Reddit years ago, but the general consensus was that the chassis was missing, and it was just someone's garbage dump. But I still wonder about it. So much of that bug was scattered about and buried in mud. It was just so weird. 2 times out of the 100 or so adventures have ended in a scary situation. There's an abandoned hospital here that I explored a lot. I even spent the night in there a few times. It was incredibly intimidating from the outside, and not many people had the balls to go in back then. One night I went in with a couple of friends, and we saw a sleeping bag on the ground that appeared to have a person in it. And one of the friends who had joined, complete idiot, thought it would be a good idea to kick the sleeping bag and see if someone was in it. Sure as shit, someone was in it. He jumped out of the sleeping bag, screaming at us. No words, just screams, and chased us out of there. The second time, I was at an abandoned factory. Huge factory. I had also been there a few times previously, made it inside, started taking photos, and then my friend asked if I could hear someone running. We waited and listened for a minute, and the running kept getting louder and closer. So we got out before we found out who it was running or why they were running. It was back in high school. A couple friends and I found some abandoned places and lived in a safe town, so we figured there wouldn't be any problem with it. Hindsight, we were dumb AF. I took a friend to an old abandoned house I've never been to. It was just a 2-story house out in the country. Nothing too spooky on the outside. We walk in and it's just a mess. Stuff was thrown about, just looked like the place was rummaged through. First floor couldn't hold my attention, so I figured I'd make my way up the stairs. On my way, up on the wall is this rectangular door. Nothing too big, but I've never seen something like that before, so I opened it. Inside was an extremely small room. You could probably only squat in it. There were just odds and ends in there. Things you'd expect to see in storage that people typically don't use often. What caught my eye, though, was a paper drawing near the door. It was a stereotypical drawing of a girl in the sun. Triangle dress, circle head, circle sun, lines for the sun's rays. Okay, kind of creepy, given it's an abandoned house, and then I turned it over. Now, my last name isn't very common where I live. Outside of family, I've never met someone with this last name. On the back of this drawing was written, Smacky. That was enough to make me flip out, leave, and drop urban exploring completely. In my hometown, there was an abandoned hospital called Cliveden Canadian Red Cross. Google it. It's great. We went for an excursion at midnight one night with a flashlight each. We explored for a while and heard a few bumps, but we put that down to animals scurrying around. The thing to note here is that the place is off-road, in the countryside. There's absolutely no artificial lights nearby. Without torches on, you cannot see anything, not even your hand in front of your face. We just finished exploring one of the 2 long corridors, and then entered the chapel. Whilst in there, we heard noise that sounded like a metal bar being kicked on the floor, coming from the main corridor. We turned off the light and peeked out into the corridor to see if we could see lights, but saw nothing. It was pitch black. You would know if someone was there and they'd need a flashlight. It would be impossible to navigate without lights and without walking into 100 hazards. We waited a while and turned our torches back, looked down the corridor to see a single wheelchair right in the middle of the corridor, where we were previously just came from. This wasn't there before, and us being kids at the time, we shat ourselves and absolutely booked it out of there. On the way out, we thought we heard glass shattering, but again saw no torches or light sources. Never went back there again at night.